and I welcome everyone to the meeting. I understand the press or public may be watching on the website. I'm sorry again that Ian Bain can't access our meetings, but I understand he's watching on YouTube. But I'm not aware of any other apologies. We've got the delay of Councillor Gordon, and we don't know about the cooperative members yet. So shall we wait and see and see if they come eventually? So members' declaration of interest. I mean, I hope everybody's interested, but if there's anything that you particularly want to declare, now's your chance. I'm assuming the silence is that you haven't got anything. So we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting of the climate change on the 21st of September. And hopefully those minutes are correct. Again, is there any dissent to say they're not? And is there anything else that anybody wants to highlight from the minutes? No. So we move on to the climate change action plan. And I understand that will be a PowerPoint presentation. And it's Gary Blenkinsop, I think, has been delayed, hasn't he? But Peter Leighton-Jones hopefully is here.
I am indeed. Thank you very much. I can appreciate that obviously there's been a big announcement this weekend and there's going to be fallout from that. So I'll try and keep my presentation as brief as I can, as concise as I can, and give plenty of opportunity for questions. But I'm just going to share my screen now. Could you confirm, Councillor, that you can see my screen?
Not yet.
Any luck now?
No. I think we might be getting there, yes.
Perils of technology.
I know.
Is it there now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to give you a synopsis of where we're at currently with the programme at a very high level. Then I'm going to quickly talk through the climate change action plan. I'm going to talk about, we'll give an update on the public consultation that's currently live in relation to climate change. And then I'm going to talk a bit about a specific project called the Carbon Literacy Project. So in terms of laying the foundations for the work that we need to do, I think it's pertinent to note some of the changes that have happened recently. Obviously, the Deputy Leader has got climate change as their portfolio responsibility, which is great. But we've also been through a restructure relatively recently, where a new corporate director role has emerged, which has climate change listed in the roles and responsibilities, which again, I think is very excellent in terms of showing that we've got that thread right down from the top of the organisation. And that recognition flows down into further roles, the service director role, service manager posts within that directorate, who now have accountability for driving carbon reduction work across the organisation and the district as a whole. I'm leading the programme from an operational delivery standpoint. So there's a climate change team with 6 individuals working in it, which I manage. And it's our responsibility to now accelerate the net zero plan that we've put in place. So the top-down mandate is there, the leadership is in place, and that's now got to be matched by bottom-up operational work to turn that vision into a reality. In terms of what we need to do in terms of the foundations, we've got a robust strategy, I think now, and policies and supportive action plans and strategies across the organisation that sort of complement the work that we're going to have to do in this area. We're going to need to embrace technology, the latest thinking and market innovations. This field moves really quickly. Applying standards and existing metrics and tools for consistency and efficiency. There's no point reinventing the wheel and duplicating effort. We need to look at the blockers that might exist and deal with that. And that's why I'm going to talk a bit about the Carbon Literacy Project, because the attitudes within the organisation obviously have to match our ambition and vision. We need to look at existing contracts to see what ability we have to put in place the things we need to do to address supply chain emissions, and look to renegotiate some of those arrangements if we can, or when we come to retender them, make sure that they do reflect climate change implications throughout the delivery of those services that are outsourced. And we've obviously got a lot of existing partnerships, forums and networks that we can take advantage of to make sure that we deliver this programme efficiently. There's a lot of work to do, so we're going to have to divide up that labour to get it done. And then we need to consult with the public and other stakeholders, which again is why I'm going to talk a bit about the public consultation. So I'm just going to come out of these slides briefly to show you the climate change action plan. So given the length of the document, I can't really give you a full overview in a session like this, but the document should now have been shared with all councillors, I think, from Councillor Jack Hemingway, and it's also being published online, so members of the public can now freely access that documentation. If they go to wakefield.gov.uk/climate, they should be able to view that document. And obviously it is a substantial document, but this reflects the scale of the challenge and the breadth of work that this agenda covers, really. We need to systematically change the way the council works, and to also look at how our society and communities operate as well. So it's a pretty vast task and challenge, and it covers every single service area in the council. But we will look to streamline this over time, I think. And from next year, we're going to look to do annual reporting to transparently report on progress that's being made year on year, both at the programme level and on an individual project basis as well. So I think some of the projects that are listed within this document will come out of the plan itself and go into that annual reporting process. And then that will help to make this a more succinct document. And it will also be very organic. This document is a 10-year plan. The approach will need to flex based on the ever-changing landscape in this area. Technology and policy is bound to change over that period of time. And that means that we are going to have to be quite flexible in responding accordingly. I'm just going to take you to one page in particular, and I'll try and make that a bit bigger so you can see it. So this just gives an overview of the work streams that we've put in place to cover what we need to do across the organisation mainly, but also the district as well, as that develops as a specific work stream. So we need to look at the estate, obviously our buildings and the assets and land that we own. So a lot of that is going to be looking at energy efficiency within buildings, simple things initially, things like LED lighting, building management systems, and so on and so forth. But we'll also need to look at things like deep retrofits. So trying to decarbonise the heating supply, which obviously relies on natural gas in the main in this country. And that's quite a difficult to treat area. But there is funding available at the moment, which we're trying to tap into via Salix and Bays. So that could help to kickstart that programme. We need to look at our fleet vehicles and transition away from diesel and petrol towards ultra low emissions vehicles, primarily electric vehicles, I think, in the first instance, but hydrogen as well, maybe, as that develops as a viable technology. Around 70% of our emissions base resides in the supply of electricity into our buildings. So that is obviously a crucial area to address. So we're going to look to hopefully self-generate by building some energy parks that will rely on solar to feed that energy into us as a business via an offtake agreement. We have identified opportunities. We just need to do some feasibility work around that. We do recognise that there will be some residual emissions potentially at the end of the 10-year period, which we haven't been able to treat via some of the other measures that we look to implement. So we will have to do some offsetting work, but we will be able to hopefully retain control over some of that delivery by using the White Rose Forest as an outlet for tree planting work. So I think that could be quite promising. The fifth work stream is about behaviour change and influencing. So some of that is about decision making and ensuring that climate change issues are reflected in all of the work we do in terms of management and delivery. So making sure that climate change is dealt with in one-to-ones, appraisals, design of schemes, scoping out of schemes and business cases right at the earliest stages. Procurement and supply chain is another big one. Lessons learned from things like COVID-19. Obviously, it's shown what is possible when we unite in unison towards a greater good, trying to achieve something that you wouldn't have thought was possible 6 months ago, for example. We would have never really been doing sessions remotely like this previously, but we've shown that we can change the way that we work, and that can have a knock-on beneficial impact on emissions and people's quality of life as well. And then the sixth work stream is really the big one, looking at place-based district-wide emissions. So we are consulting at the moment, which I'll go on to in a short while. But we also need to look at promoting sustainable lifestyles, placemaking, which is sustainable communities, engagement and support for business, especially small businesses, and then looking at the sort of large-scale sectoral decarbonisation work we need to do and how we maximise opportunities in terms of green jobs creation and a green recovery, which ties into the Build Back Better agenda. So I'm just going to go back into the slides. So like I said, there is a public consultation at the moment. We have 4 surveys and they cover residents, businesses, secondary school pupils and primary school children. And we split it up in that way because we do feel that we'll get different feedback from those groups. They'll have different concerns. And I think school children are especially crucial because they're the people that are going to be most affected by future climate change issues. So we really need to be working with them to make sure that those viewpoints are reflected in the work that we do. In terms of the residents, we use the People's panel for that, but it's also open to everybody, and we are plugging that through all of our communications channels, through social media, for example, and also networks that we have available to us within the council. So we would welcome people to respond to that survey because the more people that do, the more we'll get out of that process. All of those surveys are live until the end of December, but we may extend, given the difficult period in which we're doing this in terms of COVID. And obviously there are other pressures on people and businesses that we need to take into account. So that might run into January. Also, we will be running several themed focus groups to get broader stakeholder views. And we'll have to use remote methods to deliver that. So we're just looking at the technology available to us. We might use Link or we might use something else. But I think in terms of the climate change action plan and making sure that is scrutinised, there will be a members briefing that will allow people to go into more detail around the content of that plan and to ask us questions about it and to give their feedback and to recount any concerns that they might have about the approach. And we're hoping that focus group for members will be the first one in this series of focus groups, probably towards the end of November, the start of December. So you should be finding out more information about that shortly. But we also want to do some themed focus groups which look at engaging with youth parliament specifically. Separate to that as well, educational establishments, voluntary community and charitable groups, infrastructure organisations, so people like Northern Power Grid, Northern Gas Networks, National Grid, Yorkshire Water, developers, highways, and so on. Businesses operating in the district as well. We'd like to get some participation in that area. And then public sector bodies, wider public sector bodies as well. So we're really trying to maximise what we get out of this exercise so that we know that we're heading in the right direction, really, especially on the district-wide work that we need to do. So there's a lot going on at the moment, numerous projects underway under this programme, but I was asked to do a piece on carbon literacy, specifically as part of this session. So just to define what carbon literacy is, it's an awareness of the carbon dioxide costs and impacts of everyday activities and the ability and motivation to reduce emissions on an individual, community and organisational basis. And that's run by the Carbon Literacy Project, which has really been recognised as a de facto sort of training regime to help deliver this type of learning. And the hope is that it helps to catalyse climate change action within organisations, because it really recognises that although the technology exists for us to put measures in place to reduce carbon emissions towards a net zero future, there's also a cultural component to making that transition, and by helping people to better understand how carbon works, the impacts that carbon emissions have and the consequences of inaction, that it can help garner a sort of increased support, I suppose, for taking this action. So it's a full day's worth of learning. It's 7 hours, it has to be 7 hours, and it covers climate change, carbon footprints, what people can do and why it's relevant to them and the business as a whole. And they have actually, the Carbon Literacy Project, created free courses, which then can be tailored for specific local authorities. But there is specific content geared towards our sector, aimed at operational staff, but also councillors and senior management. And it's meant to be quite a dynamic course, so not just death by PowerPoint slides, it's group work activities and videos. But obviously it is quite challenging to deliver a programme of work like that during a pandemic. So we might have to split it over 2 days each training session just to make it manageable, because it is very difficult to concentrate when you're at home and you're not having that face-to-face interaction. So I think it will be quite slow to develop, but it will be cumulative, the effect. So we'll start with some of those priority service areas, and obviously we want to give councillors an opportunity to tap into that training and senior management as well, because that should filter down, cascade down to operational staff. So part of it is about making pledges as well, and submitting evidence of what people are going to do once they go back to their service areas. And part of that as well is trying to identify climate change champions that can help drive forward this work, because it's quite a small team, the climate change team, so we will need help. So once we train specific individuals, they can then go away and train people within their own teams, and then hold those teams accountable in terms of the work that needs to be done, and filter that back to ourselves in terms of reporting. So like I said, pledges and accreditation. So if anyone goes through the training, we have got a trained person within our team that can train other people to then train other people. And anyone that goes on that training course, the full day training course, can then be certified under the Carbon Literacy Project, and that's £10 per person. So the training materials are free, which is great. Like I said, there is a cost for individual certification, but this can be thought of as a business investment. There has been research that has shown that if you can train people up on climate change issues, then it can equate to things like energy savings within the business, which then has a knock-on effect in terms of cost savings as well. So there are dual benefits, really. And there's also quite an extensive support network across other public sector organisations who we can learn from and share our successes with. And I think in terms of the wider benefits, it shows our commitment really to climate change action if we can become a carbon literate organisation. And there are different levels of ambition, so bronze, silver, gold and platinum. Each one has its own criteria and costs and benefits. But I think initially we will just aim for bronze, because in terms of silver and beyond, the percentage of the workforce that you have to train is quite significant and undertaking. And when we can only deliver quite small training groups at present, it would be difficult to train up, 1,000 members of staff plus. But the ambition would be to move throughout the tiers, so from bronze to silver and beyond. And I think that would be achievable over a 10-year period of time. So hopefully that does give you an overview of what we're trying to achieve in terms of some of the organisational work, like I said, it only covers a very small part of what we're trying to do as a whole, and the Climate Change Action Plan is a very big document that people need to assimilate and get to grips with and have an opportunity to ask more questions about. And that's what the consultation is about, really, and drawing out some of those viewpoints and I guess trying to improve on what we've already put in place. So that's all I really wanted to cover at this stage. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions.
I don't think anything's coming up, unfortunately. Oh, the moment. Councillor Harvey, yeah?
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Could I just just wanted to know what sort of involvement Unite and Unison is in this 10 years plan for climate change? Would you please just outline it or highlight some bullet points for us? Thank you.
Yeah, we were hoping to bring them in as part of the focus groups, to be honest. We have done some work with Just Transition Wakefield in terms of engagement, but we want to broaden that out more widely to the trade unions because we recognise the importance of bringing them into the equation, especially in terms of looking at the job sector and the impact of recession and what we can do around climate change to build a better future, I suppose, and make the workforce more adaptable and resilient to future challenges. So hopefully that answers your question, but I recognise we do need to do more engagement with trade unions, and part of this public consultation exercise is about doing that.
Sorry, Chair, can I just follow this up a little bit? So just wondering, what is the reason to pick trade union as the partnership for this, test drive? And what kind of involvement do you have with private sectors, business and probably Chamber of Commerce or those organizations for this, engagement?
Sorry, Councillor Harvey, it's about the trade unions within the local authority, not without.
Sorry, Chair.
Peter, do you want to expand on?
Yes, I just want to know what is the reason why the trade union has been picked to work as a partner in our 10 years climate change plan, and how we are going to be able to engage with other private sectors organizations, to actually bring them on board at the same time. That is my question.
Well,
yeah,
I'm sure Peter will want to expand upon that, but the whole thing about it is, first of all, to bring the trade unions who already have an agenda of climate change within the authority on board, and then to see what they are doing regionally and locally. But also, Peter, I think, had indicated that every organisation is going to be approached, aren't they?
Yeah, to the fullest extent possible, we will approach everybody, but recognising that the focus groups, I suppose, have to be manageable. But we do have this business survey, which is available to everybody that operates, any business that operates within the district, even if they're a national company or a multinational that just has a base here, really. And like I said, we do want to engage with as many organisations as we can. So a lot of large organisations operate within the district. We've got a lot of distribution hubs, for example, but we want to bring SMEs on board as well. So I think there's a Federation of Small Businesses that's been approached as part of this public consultation exercise, and the Chambers of Commerce, to try and bring them in as well. So I think it's initial stages, really. So there's work to be done, but we are looking to bring in as broad an audience and stakeholder group as possible to help deliver this work, because we are going to have to work with business extensively throughout.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment? Our problem is that it's a very large document, and yet we as councillors all need to own it.
Hello, Chair. It's Councillor Dagger. I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah, Peter. Achieving, carbon neutral it's a 10-year programme. Have you identified any quick wins?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of energy efficiency within buildings, and a lot of those measures are quite easy to quantify. So, for example, LED lighting, it's very well established as a technology. It's easy to quantify the savings that will be made, and it's a very cost-effective measure to take. So things like that are a bit easier. Some of the other things are more difficult because you have to employ like whole life costing type mindsets to justify the investment decision. So if you're looking at an electric vehicle, for example, the upfront cost will be more, but then you have to look at the operational savings that might be made in terms of fuel and also maintenance. So it's about a change in mindset, some of this, and it's the same with any new buildings that we need to construct. But I think the self-generation as part of energy parks could be a relatively quick win. I mean, it's a medium-term aspiration, but we would be looking to deliver that within the next 4 years. And if that addresses 70% of the emissions base, and that puts us on the road towards that net zero target by 2030, quite significantly, I think. And then there's some of the softer stuff around things like carbon literacy, because if we can avoid emissions, that's the best thing to do in terms of the greenhouse gas hierarchy. So obviously not wasting energy and so on. So there are some quick wins, but I think some of the work needs time to develop as well, and there will need to be some feasibility as well to set us on that path, I suppose.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter.
I think Councillor Stokes had a question.
Many of the
Are we back?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, many of the distributors that we have within Wakefield District are actually based within our town. I'm just wondering if we're looking at either getting them to change their operation or looking at relocation, and are we talking to them at a local level or a national level?
I think I caught most of that, but it broke up a little bit. But what I would say is that we are working with economic growth and housing and regeneration colleagues to be involved in all of the master planning work that's ongoing in terms of a lot of these towns that are going through that process of regeneration, to try and make sure that climate change related issues are embedded.
Good job.
Sorry, there was a bit of feedback from somebody there, I think.
Sounded as if somebody was having a party.
I think they're muted now. Yeah, so we are involved in those master plan processes, because if we can get in at that earlier stage, then we can help shape the future of those plans. But in terms of relocating distribution centres, that's not something that I would personally be involved in terms of decision making.
Is that okay, Graham?
Yeah, that's okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I mean, I think we're all in awe that it's such a big subject, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think obviously the members' briefing will hopefully help to give you a better opportunity in terms of first being able to digest that document and prepare any questions that you might have, and then in terms of us being able to go through it a bit more forensically to give you that detail that sits behind it.
Yeah. I think Tom Gordon's now joined the meeting, and so we welcome Tom. Have you anything to say on this subject? No, maybe he hasn't joined us. Ah. We put it down, Tom, to the fact that you're in Nottingley, but Graham has better reception. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No, I'm taking the silences that you're all taking it on board. I'm not sure where we are, Lynn, now with the agenda, because the next item is air quality. And I thank Peter for his presentation and hope that Gary might have arrived by now, but I suspect he's late, isn't he?
Yes, I can't see that Gary's arrived yet. I can try contacting Gerard to come early. But as I say, Gary, we weren't expecting him before about now anyway.
Right.
You might want to just take the forward plan item in the meantime. I know it's not a lot, but it maybe give us chance to find Gerard and to see if Gary arrives.
Right. So if everyone is agreeable, we'll move on to the executive leader's forward plan. And the current plan, the 6 decisions listed, and they're relevant to the committee. 2 have been agreed by Cabinet in October, and the remaining 4 decisions are expected to be taken in November and December. And that includes the Ings Road City Centre Phase 2, which I think is out for consultation at the moment. Nottingley Master Plan, which 2 of you here might wish to comment on. The joint UTMC service and air quality management areas, which of course we're going to be informed hopefully by Gary and Gerard in a few minutes. I had a meeting last week. Well, I attended a briefing of both highways and planning. And obviously sort of there's a whole debate that will be ongoing about roads versus pollution, house building and the quality of it. And of course, if there's change to the planning, it gives even more independence than developers already have. And the worry is, will they adhere to conservation in terms of house building? I don't know if there's any of those items that anybody wants to discuss in greater detail at future meetings. Certainly the Ings Road City Centre development has gone out to consultation, and it's hopefully to improve the road, not to actually change it significantly. So it's not an additional road, it's just a more efficient setup, I think, and hopefully will be safer for everybody. I don't know if the 2 Nottingley members want to say anything about the Nottingley Master Plan, but hopefully it's looking at quality of life and generally improving the area for Nottingley. Yeah. I don't think there's anything more we can say on that. Any response, Lynn, from Gerard? Oh, sorry, Harry, I didn't appreciate that you were here, and that was very bad of me. So there's 3 members from Nottingley on this committee. Wow.
Yep. Can I just ask, in terms of the Nottingley Master Plan, there's been some criticism because of COVID that we've had to do everything online, the time it's taken, and people not getting the leaflets that were supposed to have been delivered. And I think surveys have been sent out again. Things that have been raised by local peoples, more infrastructure for schools and medical facilities in relation to the Nottingley Relief Road. I'm just hoping that that's taken on board by the planners when it all comes to a conclusion. Can I also ask about the air quality management areas, review and revocation? The last figures I saw, particularly for the M62 corridor areas, seem to show that we haven't actually broken any of the air pollution figures for a few years, which is why they're looking at revocation. I know Nottingley has actually reduced the manufacturing base. We've no longer got a chemical works, you no longer get any pits. I think that some of the lorries travelling through the district now have better quality management systems than what they've had in the past. But are we really in a position where air quality management areas are able to be revoked?
Yes, I think that's the worry, isn't it? Particularly at the present moment when To some extent, traffic has declined, but we don't know what the input will be, or the impact will be if and when the virus is resolved. So hopefully that can be a question that we put to Gerard when he turns up. And we'll ask them if in fact they are reviewing them at the moment. Any news, Lynn, from Gerard? No. Dick,
Not
do you
at the
want to?
moment. Can I suggest maybe just take a 10-minute break and I'll see what I can sort out?
Right. I think Dick wants to ask a question before we do that.
Okay.
Are you there, Dick?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we're on about pollution and the lack of the less transport movements and everything else. Well, I can assure everyone that there isn't less transport in Featherstone. Featherstone itself is absolutely chock-a-block on a daily basis. Yeah. And Fridays, it's a no-go area at all, which, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate that the rest of the district is. But we seem to be having a preponderance now, that's a big word, of large 40-ton trucks coming down a B road into Featherstone and then turning and going off to Pontefract. And this seems to happen after about 8 o'clock in the evening. They're just one after the other after the other. What's causing that? I have no idea, but the amount of pollution that seems to be, that I would expect in Featherstone, we could do with someone coming and doing a test of the pollution levels in Featherstone, in and around Featherstone.
Right. Kevin? Is Councillor Swift there?
Yes, indeed. I was just typing in an apology that I've got another meeting at 11, so I'm sorry we haven't really managed to do very much so far, but best of luck for the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Can we take a break, have a cup of tea for 10 minutes, and we'll resume at 1:45. I make it 25 to at the moment. Sorry about this.
Could you just let me know if you can see my screen there, please?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
We're now live, Chair.
Oh, good. So welcome everybody back, and welcome particularly Gerard McCormack, who's who's the team manager for environmental protection, and he's got a presentation for us. Thank you, Gerard.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody. I'm sure you've had a very interesting presentation from Peter this morning on climate change, and I think the first thing that's worth noting is that there are links between climate change and air quality. Sometimes those interrelationships are complicated, and actually what can be good for air quality sometimes can be poor for climate change. So it's a complex issue, but in the main, we can take it that if we're burning less oil and less gas, then it's good for both air quality and climate change. And it's certainly important that we consider both things together, that there's an integrated approach taken towards climate change and air quality. So today I'll give you a presentation on local air quality monitoring, as it's called, at the LAQM regime. We'll be looking at the threat of poor air quality, the sources of air pollution, local air quality management, which is the regime that local authorities are tasked, duty-bound to follow, and we'll be looking at a quick look at the future of air quality. So the threat of poor air quality, why is it important? Well, it has impacts clearly on health. The local air quality management regime is based around health-based national objective levels. And I'll come on that in more detail as the presentation continues. But there are also impacts on the environment. We have, importantly, nitrogen disposition, which can be associated with emissions of nitrogen dioxide, particularly from vehicles, but it can also be associated with ammonia emissions, particularly from agriculture, which, as the ammonia interacts with the other chemicals within the atmosphere, can lead to particulate matters and increased levels of nitrogen. And as the nitrogen falls to the ground, that upsets the chemical balance. It can then start to favour a different species of plant, which in turn has an impact on the animals that feed on those plants. And it can also have an impact on water. Where you get nitrogen disposition, you're increasing the chances of large algal blooms, which depletes the oxygen from the water, and obviously that has a direct effect on fish and other animals living in the water. But it can also have a direct effect on plants and animals themselves. But poor air quality also has an impact on the economy. The Environmental Audit Committee estimates that it's somewhere between 8.5 billion and 20 billion pounds per year. Those costs will be borne by the NHS, the social care structures, directly as people's health is impacted upon, but it can also reduce productivity, people going off ill. So looking at the health impacts in a bit more detail, it's estimated that poor air quality leads to about 28,000 to 36,000 deaths per annum. A recent study by the Royal College of Physicians and the Royal College of Paediatrics and Childcare puts that figure at around 40,000. And we can also see that from the figures on the right there, excuse me, that a simple and very small reduction in something like particulate matter which is the very small particles that air pollution gives rise to. A very small, a 1 microgram per meter cube reduction can result in a reduction in 50,000 or 51,000 cases of coronary heart disease over the next 18 years, 16,500 strokes, 9,300 cases of asthma, and 4,200 cases of lung cancer. And we can see how that air pollution affects people throughout their lifetime. Pregnancy, we have babies born with a low birth rate, children who are particularly vulnerable as their bodies go through that development, adults, and then through to the elderly. So impacts right throughout a person's lifetime. As we can see, it affects everybody, but there are certain groups of people that are more vulnerable. So, for instance, elderly people who, because of existing health conditions, are more vulnerable to air quality, and importantly as well, children. A lot of studies now are focusing on the exposure of school children. We find that schools can be located on busy roads, and we've got playgrounds next to busy roads, and we've got children playing outside. This is a particular problem in London, but it's something that within Wakefield we're hoping to get a better grip, get some more information on as our monitoring technology evolves. But we can also see that here that communities who live with poor air quality are more vulnerable to the effects of it, which makes sense. Excuse me, I feel like I've been exposed to a poor air quality this morning in the house. Excuse me. So if you live in an area with poor air quality, you're going to be more vulnerable to it. And who is it that tends to live in those areas? Well, it tends to be people who live in the lower socioeconomic groups. So air quality brings with it a certain amount of social injustice as well. If we can see here, sorry, the numbers seem to have reversed themselves, but if we can see here, this is the most deprived, socioeconomically deprived group in the country, and we can see that there are far more people who are being exposed to poor air quality, and in fact levels of air quality that are exceeding the national objective levels than we can see down at the further end of the opposite end of the scale, where we have those people with the most money, most affluent people, are living in areas with the highest air quality. And the double whammy of all of this is that it's these people, the people with the least amount of money, it's these people who are in fact less likely to be giving rise to the air pollution. It tends to be that it's all these people here that are giving rise to the air pollution. They're more likely to be doing the driving, etc., etc. These people are more likely to be taking public transport, but because these people live next to the busy main roads in the urban centres, they're being exposed to the poor air quality that these people are giving rise to. We see the people, in the Chelsea tractors dropping off their children outside the schools, which is no comment on them, but it's not the people but they'll be driving past the people in the city centre that are probably living in the poorer houses and the households with the lowest incomes. So looking at the sources of air pollution, many and varied. We can see, so for instance, agriculture tends to give rise to, or gives rise to, nearly 90% of all the ammonia emissions in the country, which again is important from a particulate matter point of view, which is some of the most damaging pollutants to our health, but also these impacts on the environment that we've discussed about nitrogen disposition to land and water. From Wakefield's point of view, we are particularly interested in levels of nitrogen dioxide. And we can see here that the biggest culprit for emissions of nitrogen dioxide is in fact road transport. In terms of particulate matter, and I think this might be surprising to many people, it's no longer the big industries that are giving rise to the greatest levels of pollution. So as we've switched away from the burning of coal in fire stations and cleaned that industry up, it's now become residential and small-scale commercial combustion that's giving rise to nearly 45% of all the particulate matter pollution in the country. And there is a refocus now away from, as road transport is becoming cleaner, and I say that bearing in mind that there is no safe level of pollution, but as road pollution becomes, road emissions become less, there is a refocusing on particulate matter, and in so much as that's the case, a refocus particularly on domestic burning, people buying in wood burning stoves. So the government's looking to phase out the burning of traditional coal by, I think it's 2023. There are going to be new changes to smoke control zones, which will come on at the end of the presentation. So different sources of pollution requiring a different focus. So local air quality management. The Environment Act 1995 requires local authorities, including Wakefield, to undertake a number of obligations in relation to air quality. The first of those is a requirement to monitor air pollution concentrations within the district, and I'll come on to how we do that monitoring. Where we find that emissions of air pollutants are exceeding these national objective levels, and I'll come on to those in a minute, we are required to declare an air quality management area. And where we do that, we are then required to put a plan in place setting out how we are going to go about reducing those levels of pollution. And finally, every year we are required to submit an annual status review to DEFRA, setting out the progress that's been made in reducing concentrations of pollutants and outlining the strategies that we'll take in the future. So what pollutants do we measure in Wakefield? As I've said before, the national objective levels that are set by government are a set of health-based levels above which we would be required to declare an air quality management area. Now, within Wakefield, whilst there are 13 national pollutants that have a national objective level, in the Wakefield district, it's primarily nitrogen dioxide that we are concerned with, and that's associated with vehicle emissions, mirroring the national picture, and also fine particulates, PM10 and PM2.5. Now, importantly, we do get natural sources of particularly PM2.5, so that can be sea salt, and 50% of particulate matters still remains man-made, and that's something that we've got to start looking at moving forward. So how do we monitor air quality in the district? Well, we've got 3 continuous monitors. Now, they're expensive, bulky pieces of equipment, very accurate pieces of equipment, but very bulky. You'd be looking at about £60,000 for one of those. And because of their size and bulk, they are fixed. We have 2 of those in the Wakefield city centre and 1 of those in Castleford. And then we have a network of 46 passive diffusion tubes, and that's the map that you can see there on the right, detailing the location of these diffusion tubes. Now, they're very inexpensive little tubes that we obtain from the lab every month and then deploy on a monthly basis. Apologies. And they supply us with information about the nitrogen dioxide levels within the district. Problem with those, though, is that they can be inaccurate, up to 30% inaccurate. But to overcome that, we locate 3 of those at each of our continuous monitoring stations, and then we're able to make adjustments for any inaccuracies associated with the diffusion tubes. And then recently we've started to look at, as technology's moved on, relatively inexpensive mobile monitors are starting to come online. I mean, I say relatively inexpensive, you'd still be looking at £4,000 for a good mobile monitor, and then you have associated on costs, maybe £2,000 a year in servicing that. But they certainly are starting to open up some new avenues for us, particularly around identifying hotspots. So occasionally we do get people phoning us up. I know that we've had some particular interest expressed around levels of pollution in Nottingley, where we've deployed some additional diffusion tubes, but it's something, again, that we could look at to use our new mobile monitors. They give us the capacity to measure not just nitrogen dioxide, but importantly, things like particulate matter. I'm certainly interested in looking at work to deploy those near vulnerable groups, such as children, which is something that we've not, children at school, which is something that we've not been able to do because the only way that we currently have, or we previously had of measuring particulate matter, was through the use of the continuous monitoring stations. And as I said, those are fixed, but we'll be able to use these new monitors and locate those outside schools, hopefully. What's the monitoring been telling us? Well, as I've said, nitrogen dioxide from vehicles is the main pollutant of concern within Wakefield. We have declared 10 air quality management areas since the monitoring programme started. But we're at a stage now, because of reducing levels of nitrogen dioxide, we're at a stage now where the national objective level is only being exceeded in the Wakefield City air quality management area. Now, within that area, we have 12 diffusion tubes, and the national objective level is only being exceeded at 2 of those locations. So, generally speaking, at most areas within Wakefield district, we are below the national objective level. And that's because the nitrogen oxide levels have fallen significantly over the last 10 years. Now, when it comes to particulate matter, those levels have plateaued out. If we look at that in a bit more detail, if we look at the trends for nitrogen dioxide, we've got Wakefield on the left here. You can see in 2009, the red dotted line is the national objective level of 40 micrograms per metre cube. And you can see that a lot of the lines are actually above that level. And then over the years, those levels have begun to reduce. And here's the Wakefield level, which is just over 40 micrograms per metre cube, so just over the national objective level. But happily, most of the levels now are below the objective level. And if we look on the right-hand side, we can see that that picture has been mirrored nationally, and the overall at the majority of sites within the country, nitrogen dioxide levels are now starting to fall below the national objective level. We look at PM10, coarse particulate matter. We've got the blue line, which is showing the levels in Wakefield. We've got the national objective level in red at 40 micrograms per metre cube. But I've also, for interest, put on the World Health Organization level, which is down at 20 micrograms per metre cube. So we have a difference of approach between the World Health Organization, who say that you're going to save more lives. It's a better level down at 20 than it is up at 40. A big difference between the European and the World Health Organization levels. We can see that we are just below those levels. Again, mirrors quite closely the national level. Some of these slight increases, which we can see both in Wakefield and nationally, are often associated with meteorological conditions. If we look at PM 2.5, again, I've put on the national objective level, the UK level, in red, and the World Health Organization level in green. And the Wakefield PM 2.5 level is shown in orange there. So we can see that we are well below the national objective level, but actually in 2018 and 2019 would have exceeded the World Health Organization. Now, we'll come on to this at the end of the presentation, but the difference between the World Health Organization and the UK target, it's not actually an objective level, it's just a target level, is becoming more and more important as we exit, because of Brexit and the publication of the Environment Bill, which is talking about setting a new level for a new objective level for PM 2.5, and there's some discussion as to whether or not they will mirror the World Health Organization. And as we can see from the graph, if they do that, then we will, on 2018, 2019, we can be seen to have exceeded that level. However, there is also a lot of speculation that the Environment Bill, the government will not go that far and will introduce a level that is maybe closer to the current UK target level. Again, on the right-hand side, we can see that we are, again, mirroring the national trend. So, the monitoring also is giving us some ability to look at other specific areas of interest. So we can see here the impact of lockdown on nitrogen dioxide. And I think there's been a bit of interest expressed about this morning, that why would we begin to revoke air quality management areas based on levels of nitrogen dioxide that might be associated with reduced vehicle journeys. Well, absolutely right. We'll come on to that in a minute, hope to alleviate any fears there. But we can see the impact of lockdown here. We've got the blue line, which is giving us the 2019 levels of nitrogen dioxide, and we can see the reduction associated with lockdown in the orange line there of 2020. We can also see that the levels are starting to, they're actually beginning to exceed some of the pre-lockdown levels, I guess. Given where we're at currently, those levels will reduce substantially over the next month or so, but the monitoring that we carry out will allow us to capture that data. Also gave us, this is just out of interest, this is the Speedibake fire, and this is the PM 2.5 level. We can see here this peak, which is associated with the Speedibake fire. Now, it was a one-off event. It's not something that Speedibake had any control over, but it certainly gave us, when we saw what was going on there, it was something that we flagged with public health and just asked them to have a view at admissions in hospital that might have been, did we get any increase in admissions to hospital, for instance, with asthma, etc. As it turned out, we didn't. It's probably too short an event to have a significant impact on people's health there. So looking at the air quality management areas, and again, just to refresh, air quality management areas are declared where levels of pollutants exceed the national objective levels. We've declared 10, the latest one being that in Hemsworth in 2013, and the earliest there being the M1 and A1 in 2004. Coming on to the proposed revocation of the Aquith and M62 air quality management areas. In November, Cabinet will be considering a proposal to revoke both of these air quality management areas. Levels of nitrogen dioxide have been below the national objective level for 6 years in the Aquith AQMA and for 5 years in the M62 AQMA. We have not taken account of this year's figures. These are running up to 2019. So hopefully you can see that this isn't a decision that we've taken as a team, a proposal that we're putting forward. This hasn't been something that we've considered on short-term data. This is long-term data. The technical guidance produced by government stipulates that you should have at least 3 years of data below the national objective. And as you can see, in the case of Aquith, we've got twice that. And in the case of the M62 AQMA, we've got an additional 2 years where we're showing that the levels are being below the national objective level. The studies have also shown that we've carried out that we can be confident that those levels will not increase. The Department of Transport has done a number of various, has done some modelling based on a number of various scenarios associated with the uptake of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles in different proportions. But they calculate that, particularly in relation to nitrogen dioxide, that the levels will fall further, somewhere between 60% and 90% up to 2050. So not only can we look back at the levels that we've got for the previous 6 years and 5 years, but we can also, with some confidence, look forward and say, okay, and we're confident that those levels will not be exceeded moving forward. During the process of preparing the revocation documents, we've consulted with the public. We didn't get any consultation responses back. We've consulted with ward councillors, with other departments, and DEFRA, who both recommended that we revoke the AQMAs in a number of annual status review submissions to them. And they've also now recently approved the revocation reports to them that we've recently submitted. I think it's important to note as well, if the revocations are approved, we will continue in our efforts to improve air quality. Certainly in the Aquith AQMA, where we currently have one diffusion tube located, we've no intention of removing that diffusion tube, so we will continue to monitor levels of air quality. It's certainly in Aquith. Looking at some of the data in a bit more detail, I'm not going to give you all the figures here, but if we look at the Aquith AQMA, we can see that it was declared in 2010. Again, it was traffic-related nitrogen dioxide levels that were exceeding the national objective level. And here's a graphical representation of the data. As you can see there, going back to 2014, we are quite a way off from the national objective level. On the right, you've just got here we've got the outline of the AQMA itself. From the M62 AQMA, here it is, stretching from Wakefield through to Nottingham. Again, we've got the data on the right-hand side, more monitoring points, but we can see again that all of those have been significantly below the national objective level for a period of time. So, measures to improve air quality. It's not just about, we don't just do the monitoring, we also look to take steps to improve air quality where we can. Now, obviously, the measures taken at a national level are very important. In particular, the stricter vehicle emissions have resulted in significant improvements in the emissions from vehicles, and in particular the establishment of the Euro 6 standard has been of great success. We've seen some very significant improvements or reductions in emissions associated with the introduction of Euro 6. The move away from coal-fired power stations has obviously been important in reducing pollutants on a national basis. But on a local basis, we carry out work on smoke control and bonfire smoke. From a smoke control area point of view, it's an offence to give rise to dark smoke from a chimney. We've had some problems, I would say, in enforcing that, in policing that, largely to do with some of the exemptions associated with it. But we'll see at the end of the presentation, the government's recognised that and is looking to bring about some changes that will hopefully help us to address the problems with domestic burning. We consult on planning applications where we look to mitigate we ask for air quality impact reports, and then we look for measures to mitigate where large developments are giving rise to increases in emissions. Importantly now, all domestic premises with on-site parking have to have plug-in points for electric vehicles. We look at active travel planning measures, cycleways, bus routes, and various other measures. Obviously, the active travel planning is important, and the work that public health are doing. We've recently carried out a number of grant-funded projects. We've got one, the EcoStar scheme, that's working with businesses located on 2 or 3 industrial estates to help them improve their fuel efficiency and reduce emissions from their freight and commercial operations. And we've also been carrying out some, we've managed to purchase a number of low-cost sensors, install those at schools. Unfortunately, the COVID epidemic has interfered with that. We've not been able to get into the schools to carry out that work, but we've got these sensors installed at the schools. I'm not entirely convinced that the particular sensors that we've got are actually producing the results that we want, so we've moved to a different type of sensor moving forward. And then we're doing various other aims. Obviously, highway infrastructure is important. We had the WER in 2015 that's led to reductions in pollution for some of Wakefield City, and we've just recently had the Glasshoughton link open, where we have installed a couple of air pollution monitors so that we can determine the impact of that scheme. So the future of local air quality management. There is no safe level of pollution, and whilst we've seen that levels of pollution have significantly improved, there is no safe level of pollution. Work will continue to improve air quality across the district. There will be a greater focus on particulate matter. I think, as you've seen, the reductions in nitrogen dioxide have been primarily associated with the introduction of structural vehicle emissions, again, over which Wakefield would have no real influence, and we are really at the beck and call of national measures to introduce tighter restrictions on vehicles. So there will be a greater focus on particulate matter, particularly that associated with domestic burning, and we'll be looking to carry out some campaigns there aimed at educating people about the changes in about the damage associated with particulate matter from domestic burning and the incoming measures that the government is introducing, hopefully through the Environment Bill. So the Environment Bill itself, as we discussed, is looking to introduce a objective level for PM 2.5. The question will be is how effective that level will be. The bill will also be introducing a civil offence of emitting smoke from a chimney in a smoke control area. Hopefully we'll be looking to, currently whilst the entirety of the district is covered by smoke control areas, it's a very patchwork quilt of smoke control areas, and we're looking to carry out some work to bring all of those together in one smoke control area, because we can see on the horizon that if we're going to tackle smoke from chimneys effectively, we're going to need to simplify the smoke control areas that we have in the district. And finally, the bill will be introducing a new regulatory body, the Office for Environmental Protection, under which measures for climate control or climate change and air quality will fall. Thank you. Any questions? I don't know if I've flown through that, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Interesting that we're debating at the moment, aren't we, nationally about poverty, and yet the most affected are the poorest in terms of pollution as well. Can I just, I'll start off by saying that we've got issues, I know, across West Yorkshire in terms of public transport and the fact that people aren't using it at the moment. And obviously that means that there's more onus on personal vehicles. I don't see how that's going to be resolved in the near future, to be honest. I think that I know the buses are very anxious about how they're going to encourage usage in the future. And it's trying to get people out of their cars again, isn't it? I hear you mentioned about the weir, and dare I say I'm directly affected because the traffic has been unbelievable on Agbrigg Road, where I live, to go on to the weir, to then come on to Bar Lane, whereas yes, previously that same traffic went through Wakefield. So it's great that it's declined in one part of my ward, but it's increased in another. And I just hope that you're monitoring that. Can I just ask about schools, because it's dear to my heart for many years, that how could we dissuade parents from, in some cases, actually wanting to drive into the classrooms, and they're on their way to work often and they're in a hurry, and they think it's only me that's stopping for 2 minutes and therefore it won't cause any problems. But in fact, the pollution around schools is pretty high everywhere, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the problems that we've had historically is the equipment, the availability of equipment that we can deploy on a mobile basis. As I said, we've got these three fixed, we've only got one fixed monitor that's capable of providing us with data on particulate matter. So whilst we can get information on nitrogen dioxide outside of schools by the deployment of diffusion tubes, I think the important pollutant in relation to the exposure of school children is in fact particulate matter. And I think that is what we are hoping to assess with the use of these new mobile monitors that we've got. I've currently got an inquiry lodged with Amy to see if I can deploy one of our mobile monitors outside St Paul's, St Joseph's Primary School in Castleford, so that we can begin to assess the level of exposure there, where we have a playground located on a busy roundabout, effectively. And I will be very interested to see what sort of levels children are being exposed to. And particularly, again, I think when we look at national objective levels, I think we need to be careful. As we've seen, we are complying with the national objective levels, but it doesn't tell the whole story, does it? Because we have children that have been exposed to air pollution at its highest when during rush hour, when they are on their way to school or walking to school, and at the end of the day when maybe people road traffic is increasing as people make their way home, and those peaks in pollution I think are important. I know there was a child in London, it was 2013, it hit the news I think last year because of a report, but there was a child in London there in 2013 whose death was attributed directly to levels of particulate matter, and unfortunately her submissions to hospital because of asthma attacks were seen to correlate very well with the times that she was going to and coming home from school. So I think you're right to raise the concern, and it's certainly something that's close to my heart, and we are looking to begin that assessment of vulnerable groups, starting with children.
Thank you. Councillor Dagger.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, you did mention about meteorological effects, on the nitrous oxide readings. What effect does that have?
Typically, again, I wouldn't pretend to understand the chemistry of it, but when we look at nitrogen dioxide levels, for instance, we can see that the levels tend to be highest in the winter months, and I would imagine that would be to do with the amount of sunlight. I would also imagine that it would be to do with the presence of other pollutants within the air that were more prevalent during the colder months. So without fully understanding the science, sunlight certainly has an effect in terms of it giving rise to levels of ozone, which can result in interaction with other pollutants, giving rise to particulate matter. And then, of course, so for instance, just to give one very simple example, as we saw during the presentation there, 50% of particulate matter is naturally occurring, but we have this residual 50% that is man-made. One of the problems that we have sometimes is that we see when the winds are blowing in the right direction, we get higher levels of pollution blown in from Central Europe. So on a simple basis, the wind direction.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, was there another question? I can't see it, but was Dick sort of asked? Councillor Taylor?
Yes, that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah. In your presentation, you mentioned the main road through Ackworth, the 6 to 8, and saying how much less polluted it is. Well, the reason why it's less polluted is because all those big wagons that used to come through Ackworth now come through Featherstone, and in particular down the 641, the B6421, and they go down a little street called Hall Street, which struggles to get a car down. And I'm just wondering the amount of pollution that must be on that road, which is used for school children going to school on a daily basis, young school children, and it goes past the school as well. And I've just wondered, could something be done? We could have a test on that road, because it just cannot be right. It's the amount of wagons on that road has, since the heavy duty ban went in Ackworth, the amount of pollution and wagons on that road has tripled, and there was nothing mentioned about the problem in Featherstone with traffic and pollution.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we can look at. I mean, again, I am very interested in knowing where we have these vulnerable groups. You mentioned there the children walking down the street. It's certainly something I can make a note of. In terms of something that we could do immediately, we can have a discussion with highways and find out what sorts of increases in road traffic and the nature of that. If they've done any traffic counts around there, if they have, has there been an increase and what's the makeup of that traffic? But in terms of doing some pollution, I can certainly look at whether or not it's feasible to get one of these diffusion tubes erected on the street, and we can start looking at some of the levels of nitrogen dioxide there.
Yeah. I think that was my point as well, that sort of we have new roads which people welcome, but in fact we don't actually look at the knock-on effect of how it's altered the network and actually worsened the situation for other areas.
Exactly. The road itself is that bad that we wanted to put a zebra crossing on the road, and the road is that narrow and windy. We haven't even got the sight lines to make it safe by putting a zebra crossing on. And every day we've got 40-ton trucks going up and down it, which just adds to the mayhem.
Yeah, I know we've on a similar basis. I've been speaking with a resident out in Nottingham that's had some concern about the rise in HGVs along particular roads, and that's something that we are currently looking to assess through the deployment of some diffusion tubes. So if we can substantiate that increase, then that's certainly something that we can look at in terms of, okay, have we got a little hotspot now?
Okay, any help would be appreciated.
Okay, and sorry, it was Councillor
Taylor.
That was Councillor Taylor from Featherstone. Yeah. And now Councillor Stokes from Nottingley wants to ask a question, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm interested in the EcoStar scheme that were mentioned, and I just wonder if you could give a bit more detail about what it can deliver, whether there's been a lot of interest available now, and do we actually encourage companies to take part in it?
Well, I think it's a voluntary scheme which looks at driving habits and looks to educate drivers about how they drive their vehicles, and in turn looks to provide information to companies on any, because of course, being cynical, I don't think that reducing air pollution is necessarily the prime driver. I think what interests companies is the fuel savings that they can make if their vehicles are being driven efficiently, and an efficiently driven vehicle is less likely to give rise to, or will burn less fuel to begin with, and in turn gives rise to less pollution. So the company involved, I haven't got the figures in front of me, and I think we're waiting for the final report, but there has been some interest. Whether or not we will be able to break down the information into reductions in pollutants that's not going to happen, but we can certainly provide some information on the number of businesses that we contacted and the number of businesses that took up the scheme. So I can provide that information. I don't have it to hand.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, is Councillor Dagger wanting to ask? No, sorry, it's Councillor Tully.
Yeah, Chair, I was just listening to what Councillor Taylor was saying, and I have to agree with it 100%. I decided this morning, because we're having this meeting, to bring my laptop downstairs and sit in my conservatory. And during the period of the time that last report has just been given, 178 HGVs have passed my house on Minthorpe Lane, which means then that they go past a school with over 1,200 young people in, and at 2:30 this afternoon there'll be 300 or 400 cars parked the length of Minthorpe Lane waiting to pick people up from that school. Now, we've just last week or the week before passed an application to build a new cooperative retail store, small retail store in South Kirby, which is on the same road with these 150 odd vehicles that just passed our house without any argument, and highway says it's all right, and everything else, everybody says it's all right. Point I'm making is this: unless we're prepared to look seriously about how we divert HGVs away from town centres and villages, we're never going to be short of this problem. That's 159, because 2 more just gone by while I've been talking. And this is an issue that we have. We're talking about people with asthma, child asthma, and respiratory diseases, and we have to put up with this in my part of the world continually, day in and day out, year in and year out, and it gets worse. And I make no exaggeration when I say there is in the region of 1,100 HGV journeys past my back garden in any single day.
Yes, and similarly, in relation to the concerns that have been expressed about Nottingham, again, that's something that we can look into and look at the facts and figures, look at the number of vehicle movements. If 5 Ways have done some studies, and it's certainly something we can look at in terms of what sort of levels of pollution have we got in that area.
I suppose the concern is then, having proven it, what do we do about it?
Well, I think here's one of the questions, isn't it? Is that where you have if the levels are below the national, if they're above the national objective level, we'd be required to declare an air quality management area and put a plan in place to demonstrate how we intend to reduce those levels. I think one of the things from my point of view that I find, I don't think frustrating is quite the right word, but a little counterintuitive, is if the levels are below, have increased, but are still below the national objective level, there is no plan that you are required to put in place. But I think it's certainly something that needs to be interwoven into, or it would make sense on the face of it, if you're going to divert traffic, to consider the impact that that's going to have on air quality.
Yeah. Can I welcome Gary? I know you've been in here a while, but I know you want to make a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to add to something that Gerard was saying earlier. Councillor Taylor's comment around the Featherstone, I think it's a good point. A couple of things that I wanted just to add to what Gerard said. Excuse me. As we do have monitors in Featherstone, which show, and they're at junction with Station Lane and Wakefield Road, so you know that junction is really busy. And those have been sort of consistently improving as well on that particular junction, and that follows the national trend. But we're not proposing to revoke that air quality management area because of increasing traffic. I think one thing that is worth one of the problems and frustrations I think that Gerard's alluded to is around the objective level itself, because it's an annual mean objective level. It averages everything out over the year. And so what this means is that it doesn't pick out maybe slight peaks and troughs in the pollution that might occur at the school run time, for example. So that's what people might see doesn't necessarily translate into the measured and monitored level. So that can be problematic when it comes to showing the improvement. Just to make that point, really, we're talking about the average over a whole year, those sorts of levels we're talking about. So by and large, for the majority of the time, that includes night time when there's nothing going by. So it's worth making that point. And I think the point that Gerard's making around the mobile units we're getting, it will allow us to get in there in a bit more with a bit more flexibility and a bit more opportunity to identify those more localized hotspots, which give real-time data, not just on a monthly and an annual basis, but much more by the hourly basis, which will give us more information to help inform those decisions moving forward. So that's an interesting one. And just also on the question on EcoStars, it is a scheme that's running all the time. It's a scheme that's funded by Local Transport Plan Fund. It's one that runs across the country, and it's open to all businesses and fleet operators to engage in. We do publicise it. It's on websites. Take-up can be a bit mixed, but it is a useful scheme, and it is free for businesses to use. So I'm quite encouraged if businesses want to take that up. It's probably something we do need to try and promote a little bit more. So we're just happy to take that one away. I just thought I'd add those few other additional comments, Chair.
Thank you. I think Councillor Daggers had to leave the meeting, so he's sending his apologies. Are there any other questions? I mean, I suppose the issues that still should concern us is basically, certainly I noticed the incredible idling of cars, and that must create its own pollutants. And if you look at any magazines in terms of lifestyle, there seems to be always a burner, a stove in the background. So on the one hand, people are purchasing them. On the other hand, they're creating more pollution. How do we monitor that?
Well, again, and I think that moving forward, there'll certainly be, I think, a renewed focus on domestic burning, and it will be interesting to see what measures are put forward in the Environment Bill or the Environment Act when it's passed into law, which seems to be placing greater focus on domestic burning. It's something that's been recognised in the Clean Air Strategy as a real problem. So I think in terms of, I know work's going on behind the scenes with suppliers of solid fuels and the bans that are coming into place in relation to traditional coal and the restrictions on the moisture content of wood. That work's going on between government and suppliers, but I think at a local level there will be a role for the local authority there in terms of getting to grips with emissions from chimneys and smoke control areas, and educating people about the impacts associated with domestic burning and the measures that they can take to improve the situation.
Can I just add, Chair, as well, just to add to those comments? I think just to summarise, it's a bit like the smoke control areas when those first came in to deal with mainly sulphur content in coal and the problems of pollution that was causing. So it is one that's generally driven through the fuel and the appliances, bringing the laws in which make it an offence to burn fuels that are above a certain sulphur content in the taste of coal, and the same thing will apply to the stoves. So as Gerard says, making sure that the wood that is used on those that can only be sold to people with those is of a sufficient dryness, if you like, that it won't cause the same level of pollution. But nonetheless, it's still a retrograde step, actually, having a fuel that is burning wood is going to cause more pollution than it would be from a cleaner fuel like gas or electricity. It is a trend that is worrying people in the profession around air quality across the piece. We'll have to see how that one pans out.
Yeah, and what about car idling?
Car idling.
Traffic jam. Do you turn your engine off or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of car idling, obviously emissions from vehicles have generally got better, but and there is a potential for an offence to be introduced of being stationary in a car with idling. It's an adoptive power, Wakefield Council, and not many councils have adopted it as a power. It's in the Traffic Management Act. So it is something, if we wanted to do, we could look at it in conjunction with colleagues in highways. It's a deterrent. It's in terms of the enforcement of it, it's a two-phased approach. So you can't just issue a fixed penalty straight away. You have to give a warning and then issue a fixed penalty notice afterwards. So most people on the warning just switch it off and they don't issue the fixed penalty notice. It is a potential to go there, and if members want to see that explored, I think that's something we could look at with colleagues in highways to see what's involved in that. It would obviously require an enforcement approach and funding around enforcing it as well, but there is provision there to allow that to happen, and it might allow a targeted enforcement campaign then of areas of concern such as outside schools. It's not a bad idea. It would just needs that commitment really to push that, if that's something that members wanted to see.
Well, I think that would be very welcome.
Okay, we'll take that away and have a look at that.
Right, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gerard. It's such a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much for that. My question is, we know that local development plan is in consultation 2036, and I'm just wondering how your team has been worked with Neville's team to make sure that the air quality is actually going to be guaranteed within this development plan itself. And do you see any potential conflict or issues if this plan, the consultation plan of development 2036, pass?
We do work with Neville's team in terms of some of the measures or steps that we want to see in place. So in terms of the guidance around the installation of EV charging points, etc. We do that, and we do, as I said, look at applications on an individual basis and look to install mitigation measures. But Gary, you might want to add something about the proposed changes to the planning system. I think you probably know more about that than I would.
Yeah, I suppose there are two things to comment on. One's on the local plan itself, and there is a requirement as part of that process of the local plan to make sure it's a sustainable development. And anyone who's spoken to Neville on the development of the local plan will tell you that it's actually at the heart is sustainable development. That can be a bit challenging. It's a challenging story sometimes. Is that for in planning terms, in terms of building new houses, all those houses tend to come with vehicles, tend to come with more net pollution, and if they're not built at the right standard, the homes that require heating, usually by gas still these days, although gas boilers getting phased out by 2025, the insulation standards and everything else all causes more pollution. So it's a difficult one. And I think it's about using the planning system and the policies around that to drive up those standards, which has happened over the years. Whether it's quick enough, whether it's ambitious enough, others will decide. There are lots of lobbies that work against each other in this area. So it's a challenging one to navigate sometimes. The balance between the demand for more housing and that has. But we do work with the planning policy team, Neville and his colleagues, to make sure that there are policies in place following national planning policy guidance, etc., to ensure that any development is sustainable. So we do work there. The other aspect which Gerard has mentioned is, and people will be aware of, there are proposed changes to the environment bill. The planning bill. That actually brings in a different dimension because it's very much pushing it towards plan-led development. So this brings into a much sharper focus. Need to get the local plan right. Obviously, this new change in legislation is coming midway to the current development of the local plan, so it probably won't change the course of the current local plan. But certainly, when it comes to the next iteration of the local plan, we'll have to have a lot more input in terms of what that plan says. And make sure it's sustainable, because there'll be a presumption in favour of development, as my understanding, through that, if it's in the local plan, and so a less reliance on individual planning applications to resolve local issues or other issues. So there's a way to go on that at the moment, and there's always a bit of tension when it comes to planning and the competing interests of new affordable houses and the impacts that has on the environment, and it's one you'll be all well versed in for your local areas, I'm sure.
Indeed, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, can I thank you both for a very interesting presentation. I think it's made us aware, maybe more questions, certainly on a local basis. And thanks very much indeed. And can I thank everybody else? I don't think there's any other business. If there is, quickly indicate this to me, please. And can I thank you for your attendance, and keep safe. Thank you. I'm ending.